September 15th, 1940, Prime Minister's residence, Tokyo. The room was thick with cigarette smoke. Yamamoto had already killed his third lucky strike. American tobacco of all things. Everybody noticed, but nobody said a word. Prince Konoye, the Prime Minister, didn't bother with the usual polite dance. He just asked straight out, if we go to war with America, what are our chances? Yamamoto didn't sugarcoat it. His answer would hang over Japan for years. If I have to fight, I'll run wild for 6 months, maybe a year. After that, I don't see any hope. The other officers shifted in their seats. Here was the man expected to lead the fight, already predicting defeat before a single shot. But Yamamoto wasn't guessing. He'd seen what America could do. He'd walked their factory floors, studied their oil fields, counted up their production line by line. He'd done the math back at Harvard, watched steel pour in Pennsylvania, and seen oil derricks marching across Texas like soldiers. He understood something the others didn't want to admit. Japan had already lost any future war with America. The only question was how long it would take. He figured he could give them half a year, maybe a little more, before America's giant woke up. Yamamoto's story started far from Tokyo in Nagaoka, Niigata Prefecture. April 4th, 1884, a sixth son born to a broke schoolteacher. His father was 56, that's why they named him Isoroku, 56 in Japanese. The family was dirt poor. Some nights they ate nothing but sweet potatoes and barley. Rice was a luxury. That kind of hunger made American abundance look even more unreal later on. In 1916, Isoroku Takano became Isoroku Yamamoto, adopted into the Yamamoto family, which was a common trick for moving up the social ladder. By then, he'd already lost 2 fingers to a Russian shell at Tsushima. Back in 1905, when Japan shocked the world by crushing Russia's Baltic fleet, that victory convinced a lot of people in Japan that sheer willpower could beat any material disadvantage. Yamamoto never bought into that. He saw the truth. Russia had been stretched thin, fighting a revolution at home and a war across half the world. America wouldn't have those problems. But to really understand the scale of it, Yamamoto had to see America for himself. In 1919, at 35, he got the orders that would change everything: report to Harvard, learn English, and study American naval progress. Nothing would be the same after that. He landed in Cambridge in April 1919, swords at his side, naval uniform crisp, looking every bit the foreign oddity among the ivy and brick. He signed up for English classes, but his C+ in the course was beside the point. His real education happened outside class. Living in a tiny room in Brookline, he barely slept. 3, maybe 4 hours a night, devouring books on industry, oil, and aviation. His room filled up with maps, stats, and technical journals. Oil was at the center of everything he studied. While other Japanese students stuck to their regular classes, Yamamoto haunted Widener Library, poring over data on oil fields and refining. He learned America was pumping out 65% of the world's oil, 358 million barrels in 1919. Japan, on the other hand, had to import almost all its oil, mostly from America. But the real lessons came during summer breaks. While others relaxed, Yamamoto hit the road hitchhiking across the country with barely any money. He spent 3 weeks in the Texas oil fields watching how they pulled oil from the earth and refined it. He lived on bread, bananas, and water, sleeping wherever he could, saving every penny to extend his research. By summer 1920, Yamamoto stood outside the Ford Highland Park plant in Detroit, watching the workers pour out at shift change, seeing the future take shape right before his eyes. 20,000 workers poured out of the plant, most heading straight for their cars. You'd never see that in Japan back then. Even military officers rarely owned automobiles. Yamamoto had hitchhiked 900 miles from Cambridge just to see what Henry Ford called the liberation of the common man inside the factory. Yamamoto managed to get in by posing as an engineering student. What he saw floored him. The assembly line in action, cranking out a Model T every 45 seconds. Each worker did a single repetitive task, almost like clockwork. From raw steel to finished car, the whole thing took only 93 minutes. He spent a week in Detroit, filling 3 notebooks with notes and calculations. Ford alone employed more industrial workers than the entire Japanese Navy. The company's daily steel use beat Japan's weekly output. And this was just one company in one city in one industry. That's what really shook him. The Americans have made manufacturing into a science, he wrote to Admiral Thomas Aburo, his mentor. They produce machines like we produce rice, systematically, efficiently, and in mind-boggling numbers. Each worker is a specialist. Every process is measured. Improvements get added right away. No waste, no delays. The numbers were almost unbelievable. American car production jumped from 485,000 vehicles in 1915 to 2.3 million in 1920 when Yamamoto visited. Americans already owned one car for every 13 people. In Japan, it was one for every 5,000. But he saw something even bigger than just numbers. Mass car production meant America could mass produce military vehicles too. Those same lines could build trucks, tanks, even airplane engines. Workers trained for precision manufacturing could just as easily make weapons. The supply chains moving parts to Detroit could move ammunition to the front lines. His biggest unauthorized trip took him to East Texas in the summer of 1921, right before he graduated from Harvard. He vanished for 6 weeks, missing several official functions and causing a bit of a diplomatic stir. He wanted to see what he called the fountains of power, the Texas oil fields. Yamamoto got there by hopping freight trains and walking, finally reaching the Spindletop Field near Beaumont, where the modern oil industry had started in 1901. The place was past its prime, but still pumping out thousands of barrels a day. He spent days talking to roughnecks and engineers, absorbing everything he could about drilling, extraction, and refining. The scale was almost beyond belief. A single well could produce more oil in a day than Japan imported in a week. The Texaco refinery at Port Arthur, which he sketched out in detail, processed 100,000 barrels every day. The whole place ran on electricity with automatic pumps and lights burning around the clock. Oil is the blood of modern warfare, Yamamoto wrote in his journal. Ships, planes, tanks, trucks, they all run on oil. America has oceans of it. Japan has none. That fact changes everything. He kept traveling, heading north to new oil fields in Kilgore and Longview. The boom was in full swing, derricks packed so tightly that workers could walk from one to another without touching the ground. Natural gas was considered a waste product, so they just burned it off in huge flares that lit up the night for miles. That waste really got to Yamamoto. Japan saved every drop of imported fuel, but here, Americans burned off enough natural gas in a single day to power Tokyo for a month. That easy abundance, more than any military show of force, convinced him just how unbeatable America really was. In January 1926, Yamamoto came back to the U.S. as Japan's naval attaché in Washington, now a captain. This posting, which lasted until March 1928, only confirmed everything he'd feared during his Harvard days. Now, with official status and a real budget, he could travel openly and watch everything up close. His first mission, update his industrial intelligence. American production hadn't just grown, it had exploded. By 1926, car manufacturing was closing in on 4.3 million vehicles. So steel production hit 48 million tons. Oil output soared past 770 million barrels. The pace wasn't just steady, it was speeding up. Yamamoto set up a routine for himself. Monday to Wednesday, he worked at the embassy, attending naval conferences and diplomatic events. Thursday through Sunday, he hit the road, always looking at the same things: how much they could make, how they got their resources, and what new technology they were using. His travels took him everywhere, including the Bethlehem steel plant in Pennsylvania, where he watched naval armor plate being made right before his eyes. The plant's electric furnaces could turn out specialty steel in just a few hours, stuff that took Japanese foundries weeks to make. 30,000 people worked there, and the place ate up more electricity than all of Kyoto. In Birmingham, Alabama, Yamamoto dug into the iron ore supply chain behind American steel. Trains showed up every hour with ore from Minnesota's Mesabi Range, coal from Pennsylvania, limestone from Indiana. The whole thing ran with a kind of precision he'd never seen. Materials crossed thousands of miles, everything timed and tracked by telegraph and telephone systems that Japan just didn't have. While posted in Washington, Yamamoto built a reputation for his Friday night poker games. He'd host American naval officers, diplomats, and intelligence types, cards, whiskey, and conversation. But these weren't just friendly get-togethers. They were intelligence missions with a deck of cards. Captain Ellis Zacharias from Naval Intelligence became a regular. Decades later, Zacharias wrote in his memoir that both sides used the games to probe each other. While bluffing at poker, they'd slip in questions about ship capabilities, naval doctrine, how the other side thought about risk. Yamamoto was brilliant at poker, Zacharias remembered. He could track every card, run the odds in his head, and read anyone's face. More than that, Yamamoto used the games to study American psychology. He wanted to see how Americans made decisions, how they handled pressure, what made them tick. The games showed him something big. Americans were natural risk takers. They bet hard because they had the money to lose. Even when they took a loss, they just kept playing. Yamamoto saw that attitude reflected in American strategy. The US could lose battles, or even whole campaigns, and still keep fighting. Japan, with its limited resources, couldn't afford to stumble, not even once. One night, in February 1926, after winning big, Yamamoto leaned over and said something Zacharias never forgot: in poker and war, the player with the most chips can wait for the right cards. Japan's playing with borrowed chips up against a man who owns the bank. Yamamoto's sharpest insight during his years in America had to do with aviation. Most naval officers still thought battleships ruled the seas, but Yamamoto saw that airplanes were the future, and the US was set up perfectly to take that lead. He toured the Glenn L. Martin Company in Cleveland, where they built airplanes with the same assembly line methods used in car factories. Workers who'd never even seen a plane before could build one in weeks. They pumped out 6 planes a day, powered by electric tools and conveyor belts. At McCook Field in Dayton, what would later become Wright-Patterson Air Force Base, Yamamoto got a close look at American aviation research. The place had more aeronautical engineers than all of Japan. They had wind tunnels, engine test stands, materials labs. Japan couldn't compete. The numbers hammered it home. In 1926, the U.S. built 1,186 military planes and 5,789 civilian aircraft. American Airlines already carried mail and passengers coast to coast on a schedule. Japan struggled to build just 200 planes a year, mostly using foreign engines and parts. The Americans think in 3 dimensions, Yamamoto wrote to Tokyo. While we perfect our battleships, they're building the whole system for air warfare. They have the aluminum, the engine tech, and most of all, the production capacity to build thousands of planes. His warnings fell on deaf ears. The Japanese Navy, still focused on battleships, convinced a big surface fight was the key. Carriers were just support ships in their minds. Recon, not real weapons. Yamamoto knew better. His biggest tour of American industry came in the summer of 1926. With his diplomatic badge and a network of contacts, he got into places most foreigners never saw. Each stop just added to his sense that America was unbeatable. At the River Rouge plant in Dearborn, Michigan, Yamamoto saw American manufacturing power in full force. The place covered 2,000 acres, basically a city. Iron came by ship, coal by train, rubber from Liberia. They did everything on site, from smelting steel to final assembly. 100,000 people worked there, and the plant's own powerhouse cranked out 400,000 horsepower. Even Yamamoto, who'd seen plenty, was blown away by the scale. He'd studied the numbers, but seeing it all up close hit different. The blast furnaces were monsters, stories tall, roaring day and night. Assembly lines ran on and on like rivers of steel. In the parking lots, cars for 25,000 workers packed the land, more than most Japanese cities had in total. At Standard Oil's Bayway refinery in New Jersey, Yamamoto saw what industrial scale really meant. They ran through 100,000 barrels a day, churning out not just gasoline, but a whole catalog of stuff: lubricants, chemicals, you name it. The new catalytic cracking towers, invented just a few years back, pulled twice as much gasoline from crude oil as anything in Japan. They've solved the equation of modern war, Yamamoto thought. Unlimited raw materials, endless production, non-stop innovation. It all pointed to one thing: inevitable victory. And Japan had none of it. In late 1926, Yamamoto headed to California. The official story was a naval conference in San Francisco, but really, he was there to size up America's Pacific strength. He found a coast turning into a fortress. May Island Naval Shipyard in Vallejo could build and fix capital ships at the same time, and it had more electrical power than every Japanese naval base put together. San Francisco Bay was ringed with huge military installations, each one dwarfing anything back home. Down in Los Angeles, he watched the aviation industry come alive, the very industry that would, in time, spell Japan's doom. Douglas Aircraft, just 6 years old, was already building next-generation planes with radical new designs. 300 engineers worked on projects Japan wouldn't even see for another decade. But what really stunned him were the oil fields. Southern California was just packed. The Los Angeles basin held over 20 major fields. Signal Hill alone had 265 wells, so dense they looked like a forest made of steel. California was pumping out 230 million barrels a year, more oil than Japan could use in 5 years of fighting. The ports told their own story. San Pedro and Long Beach were exploding with growth, electric cranes, automated loaders, the works. One berth could move more cargo in a day than Tokyo's port managed in a week. America already had the infrastructure to project power across the Pacific. When Yamamoto got back to Japan in March 1928, he put together a 200-page report on what he'd seen. It should have shut down any talk of war right there. His findings were blunt. American manufacturing outpaced Japan by a factor of 10, sometimes 20, in every area that mattered. America's oil production was 100 times more than Japan could use. Its steel output was 12 times greater. America's auto factories could switch to military production overnight. And in aviation, America's lead was growing so fast, Japan would never catch up. The Navy classified the report and filed it away. The ministry paid attention only to the bits about American shipbuilding, brushing off the industrial analysis as not our problem. The army, obsessed with its plans in China, didn't care about Yamamoto's warnings at all. He found himself more and more alone. People whispered he was too Americanized, drank coffee, smoked Lucky Strikes, read American magazines, His time in the States, instead of earning respect, made him suspect. Still, Yamamoto kept sounding the alarm. In speech after speech, article after article, he hammered the same point: Japan couldn't beat America in a long war. The gap wasn't just in numbers, it was in quality. America's system of innovation and production kept getting better all the time. Japan, stuck with limited resources and a rigid society, couldn't keep up. By 1939, his stand against war with America had made him a marked man. The same extremists who'd murdered moderate politicians now set their sights on him. The risk got so real that Navy Minister Admiral Mitsumasa Yonai, who saw things the same way, sent Yamamoto to sea, putting him in charge of the combined fleet. The move, announced August 30th, 1939, was meant to save his life. At sea, he'd be out of the Army's reach. And so, the irony, the man who most opposed war with America was ordered to command the very force that would have to fight it. Yamamoto understood the twisted logic. If war broke out, Japan needed its best strategist in charge, even if he believed the war couldn't be won. "I've been given command of the combined fleet," he wrote to his friend Yoshida. "It's like being asked to operate on a patient who's determined to kill himself. I can maybe drag this out, but I can't stop death." And that's how Yamamoto put it. He never budged from his position. In September 1940, while everyone argued about signing the pact with Germany and Italy, Yamamoto didn't mince words. He said it would lead straight to war with America. With Prince Konoye, he got right to the point. "If we fight the Americans, I'll give you 1 year. After that, I'm not promising anything." By October, with Navy Minister Admiral Oawa, he spelled it out even more clearly. "If you order me to fight, I'll give it everything I've got for 6 months. I can run wild for half a year, but after that, I have zero confidence. Don't count on me in the 2nd or 3rd year." And here's the real twist. By January 1941, Yamamoto, the guy who believed Japan couldn't win, was the one planning the attack on Pearl Harbor. The whole plan grew out of what he'd seen in America. Yamamoto knew America's weakness wasn't guns or ships, it was psychology. Americans, feeling safe behind their oceans, didn't expect to get hit. Their strength made them lazy and sure of themselves. If Japan could land a devastating first punch, maybe America would back down before it could really get going. The plan was desperate because Japan was desperate. They needed to wipe out the Pacific Fleet before it could mess with their plans in Southeast Asia. More than that, they had to convince America that fighting wasn't worth it. But even as he worked out the details, Yamamoto knew it wouldn't work, not the attack itself, but what came after. He was sure his pilots could smash Pearl Harbor. The real problem would come when America's factories started cranking out tanks, ships, and planes. He'd seen those factories himself. He knew the oil reserves, the mass production, the sheer scale America could bring to bear. Pearl Harbor would be a tactical win, but a strategic disaster, just as he predicted. As 1941 moved on and war looked certain, Yamamoto's warnings got sharper. When his staff started bragging about Japan's military strength, he hit them with hard numbers. America has 500,000 tons of oil for every ton we have. They make 500 times more steel. Their factories can start building weapons in weeks. We've already lost this war. We just haven't started fighting it yet. In September 1941, speaking to new graduates at his old school in Nagawa, Yamamoto gave maybe his most honest warning. Most people think Americans are soft, obsessed with comfort. That's a mistake. They're tough, adventurous, and smart. Look at Lindbergh's solo flight across the Atlantic. That's normal for them. Don't forget, their industry is way ahead of ours. They have all the oil they need. Japan can't beat America, so Japan shouldn't fight America. The graduates just sat there, stunned. One of Japan's top admirals was telling them straight out, If Japan went to war, it would lose. He wrote even more bluntly to his mistress, Chu Kawawai. The government's lying to the people. They talk about America as weak and divided. I've been there. I've seen their strength. We're insects declaring war on a dragon. The attack on Pearl Harbor went even better than expected. 8 battleships wrecked or sunk, 188 planes destroyed, 403 Americans killed. Japan's own losses were tiny in comparison: 29 planes, 5 submarines, 64 men. Across Japan, people poured into the streets to celebrate. The emperor's war announcement brought wild cheers. At last, Japan had humbled the arrogant Americans. The old colonial powers would be kicked out of Asia. But back on his flagship Nagato in Hiroshima Bay, Yamamoto took the news in silence. While his staff broke out the sake and celebrated, he slipped away to his cabin. Hours later, Admiral Ugaki found him there, hunched over Pacific charts. Years later, Hollywood would invent that famous line about awakening a sleeping giant, but Yamamoto never actually said it. What he did say to Agata Takura was less poetic, but much more telling. A military man can hardly take pride in hitting a sleeping enemy. Judge me after you see what the enemy does, because once angered, he'll hit back, and hard. The fact that the American carriers survived worried him, but what really gnawed at him was that the oil tanks and repair docks were untouched. From his trips to American ports, he knew how fast they could recover. The destruction looked immense, but underneath it was just a scratch. What really stung was how badly the diplomats messed up. Yamamoto had pushed for the attack to follow a proper declaration of war, but thanks to chaos at the Japanese embassy, that didn't happen. So, to Americans, Pearl Harbor looked like a sneak attack. Any hope of negotiating peace was dead. I wanted to fight a war of honor, Yamamoto told Ugaki, but now we've doomed ourselves through dishonor. Just as Yamamoto feared, Japan rampaged across the Pacific for 6 months. The fleet crushed Allied forces one after another. Singapore fell, the Philippines fell, the Dutch East Indies fell. By May 1942, Japan stood on the doorstep of India and stretched halfway across the Pacific. But Yamamoto found no comfort in these victories. He knew they were just smoke and mirrors. America hadn't even gotten serious yet. In his cabin, Yamamoto kept charts tracking American shipbuilding. The numbers were terrifying. In the first half of 1942 alone, American yards churned out 2 aircraft carriers, 4 cruisers, 23 destroyers, and 26 submarines. And they were only just getting started. Yamamoto had seen those shipyards himself. He knew they were still ramping up. Once they hit full speed, they'd outbuild Japan by a mile. Oil was worse. Even after grabbing the Dutch East Indies, Japan couldn't come close to America's oil flow. America pumped out more oil in a single month than Japan could get from its captured fields in a whole year. Rubber wasn't a problem for the Americans either. They made their own, and Yamamoto had seen it with his own eyes back in 1926. We're like children who stole candy, he told his operations officer, celebrating while the adult gets ready to punish us. Then came Midway. June 4th, 1942, almost 6 months after Pearl Harbor, Yamamoto's nightmare was about to play out. His plan was complicated, maybe too much so. He knew this might be Japan's last shot at taking out the American carriers before reinforcements flooded in. His intelligence said the Americans had maybe 2 carriers left in the Pacific. In reality, they had 3, and they'd cracked Japan's codes. The disaster unfolded exactly as Yamamoto had warned. 4 Japanese carriers, Akagi, Kaga, Soryu, and Hiryu, went down in a single day. Japan couldn't replace them, not the ships, not the pilots. 300 miles behind the action, sitting aboard the Yamato, Yamamoto got the news in silence. When he heard all 4 carriers were gone, he just nodded. Some Staff officers thought he looked almost relieved, as if a weight he'd carried for years had finally dropped. The American giant is now fully awake, he told them. Now we fight, only to delay what's coming. And he was right. In the 18 months after Midway, America launched 17 fleet carriers and 76 escort carriers. Japan managed just 6 fleet carriers. Total, the math Yamamoto had done at Harvard was coming to life right in front of him. After Midway, American factories hit numbers so big they barely seemed real. The industrial giant wasn't just awake, it was unstoppable. By 1943, America was building a plane every 5 minutes, a merchant ship every day, an aircraft carrier every month, 150 tanks a day, 500,000 military trucks a year. The Ford Willow Run plant, which didn't even exist when Yamamoto toured Detroit, was rolling out B-24 bombers every 63 minutes. The whole factory went up in 9 months, faster than Japan could build a single plant. Yamamoto read these intel reports with grim satisfaction. Every warning he'd given was playing out, only faster and more brutally than he'd imagined. The assembly lines he'd studied in Detroit were now spitting out the machines that would destroy Japan. Oil was a disaster. By 1943, America was pumping out 1.7 billion barrels a year. Japan's reserves were 50 million and shrinking fast. American submarines were strangling Japanese oil shipments before they even reached home. I told them about the oil, Yamamoto wrote in his diary. I showed them the numbers. They didn't believe me. Now our ships sit in port without fuel, while American task forces go wherever they want. Through 1942 and early 1943, Yamamoto led the fleet, knowing exactly where this was all heading. His letters to Chio Kawai, found after the war, show a man tormented by his own predictions. I'm like a doctor treating a patient I already know is terminal. I can ease some symptoms, maybe buy a little time, but I can't change where this ends. The disease is industrial inferiority, and it's always fatal. People around him started to notice how grim he'd become. He took bigger risks, threw himself into danger that didn't make sense. On tours of forward bases, he insisted on visiting the most exposed spots, almost as if he was hoping death would come for him and free him from leading a fleet he knew was doomed. Admiral Ugaki wrote in his diary, "The commander-in-chief seems to welcome danger. He knows something we won't admit. We've already lost. His real burden isn't command, it's living out a prophecy he saw coming." Yamamoto's last strategic review in March 1943 pulled no punches. America had replaced every ship lost at Pearl Harbor twice over. In a single year, they trained more pilots than Japan managed in 20. Their production kept growing. Ours kept shrinking. It wasn't courage that decided things anymore. It was math. And the math was merciless. On April 14, 1943, American codebreakers intercepted Yamamoto's travel plans. He'd be visiting forward bases in the Solomons, flying from Rabaul to Balalai Island on April 18th. The schedule was down to the minute. Classic Yamamoto. Operation Vengeance got the green light. Admiral Nimitz asked if it was worth exposing the fact that America had broken Japanese codes. The answer, absolutely. Yamamoto wasn't just a great strategist. He was the only Japanese leader who really understood what America could do. 18 P-38 Lightnings took off from Guadalcanal, skimming the sea to dodge radar. They had to fly 435 miles over open ocean and arrive at the exact moment Yamamoto's plane would be overhead. Everything about this mission, navigation, timing, execution, was perfect. At 9:34 a.m., Yamamoto's G-4M bomber went down in the jungle of Bougainville. The man who'd seen American industry up close was killed by its offspring, fighters built in factories he'd visited, powered by Texas fuel, guided by code breakers Japan couldn't match. They found his body the next day, still strapped in, hand on his sword. In his pocket was a poem he'd written days before. I have seen the future, and it belongs to those who build, not those who destroy. With Yamamoto gone, Japan lost the one leader who really grasped just how hopeless things were. His successor, Admiral Koga, didn't have Yamamoto's vision or his hard-earned respect for American power. Everything Yamamoto had predicted back in 1940, 6 months to a year of victories, then certain defeat, played out just as he said. American factories buried Japanese forces. Their oil seemed limitless, while Japan's ran dry. Radar and code breaking handed them the edge time and again. Mass production let them replace losses overnight. America's shift from peace to war industry blew past even Yamamoto's darkest forecasts. By 1944, America pumped out more war material in a month than Japan could manage in a year. The River Rouge plant alone turned out more military vehicles than all of Japan's factories put together. August 1945 brought the final proof. The atomic bombs that destroyed Hiroshima and Nagasaki, products of American science and industry on a scale even Yamamoto hadn't fully imagined, landed just as he'd warned. The Manhattan Project cost $2 billion, dwarfing Japan's entire war budget. It employed 130,000 people, used more electricity than whole Japanese cities, demanded a level of precision Japanese factories couldn't touch. The bombs arrived on B-29s, each one more expensive than a Japanese destroyer, rolling out of American plants in numbers Japan couldn't hope to match. Captain Ellis Zacharias, Yamamoto's old poker buddy from Washington, broadcast to Japan in their own language. Your Admiral Yamamoto knew this day would come. He saw our factories, our oil fields, our labs. He tried to warn you. You chose not to listen. The final numbers told the story Yamamoto had seen coming. Between 1941 and 1945, aircraft USA 300,000, Japan 76,320, aircraft carriers USA 141, Japan 16 battleships USA 8, Japan 2 submarines USA 203, Japan 126 merchant shipping, USA nearly 34 million tons. Yamamoto's prophecy, every bit of it, came true. Japan 4,152, 361 tons. These weren't just stats. They were hard proof of what Yamamoto had seen with his own eyes. America wasn't just a country. It was a vast, industrial beast. Once it woke up, no island nation cut off from resources stood a chance. After Japan surrendered, American occupation forces found Yamamoto's private papers, letters never sent, diaries never meant for anyone else to read. They laid bare just how much he foresaw and how deeply it weighed on him. In a letter to Emperor Hirohito, dated December 1st, 1941, Yamamoto wrote, "Your Majesty, I have failed in my duty to prevent this war. I've seen America's strength up close. We can't win. Their factories can churn out endless weapons. Their oil can keep them moving forever. Once their people are roused, they won't stop till they win. I can give you half a year of victories. After that, the math takes over. We're 70 million people with almost nothing, fighting 130 million with everything. The outcome's already decided." He wrote another letter to his successor, Admiral Koga, just days before his own death. "You'll inherit a doomed fleet, not because of courage or skill, but because of cold numbers. Every ship you lose, they'll build 3 more. Every plane shot down, they'll send 10. Every gallon of fuel we burn brings us closer to grinding to a halt, while they have oceans of oil. I've seen their factories. We're not fighting a country, we're facing a continental production machine. Hold out as long as honor demands, but defeat's certain." The real twist in Yamamoto's story isn't how he died, it's how he lived. The one man who understood American strength had to lead the war against it. The admiral, who knew Japan would lose, was forced to plan the very attack that sealed that fate. The prophet who warned against waking the giant was the one who woke it. When Yamamoto's Harvard classmates heard about his role in Pearl Harbor, they were floored. Professor Theodore McNally, who taught him economics, said Yamamoto understood better than anyone that Japan couldn't win. He'd seen the steel mills, the oil wells, the assembly lines. He knew what mass production meant. For him, planning Pearl Harbor must have been agony, but he didn't have a choice. In Imperial Japan's strict chain of command, refusing orders meant disgrace, and maybe worse, failing in his quiet mission to limit the coming disaster. He couldn't stop the war, but maybe, just maybe, early victories could force negotiations and shorten it. After the war, Japanese historians looking back at Yamamoto's warnings realized just how blind they'd been. Every one of his predictions came true. Admiral Su Toyota, who took command near the end, admitted, "Yamamoto saw what we refused to see. He'd been to America. He knew their power. We brushed off his warnings as defeatism. We thought spirit could beat their machines. He knew it couldn't." General Hideki Tojo, the prime minister who pushed for war, said at his trial, "Admiral Yamamoto told us we couldn't win. He'd studied in America. He knew their industry. We thought he was too westernized, but he was just telling the truth." The tragedy wasn't just personal. Japan's entire military leadership ignored the one man who'd actually studied their enemy up close. They clung to comforting illusions instead of hard facts. They preferred mystical beliefs about Japanese superiority over actual numbers and industrial capacity. Ironically, Yamamoto earned more respect from his enemies than from his own government. American naval officers who'd met him genuinely regretted his death, even as they celebrated their victory. Admiral Chester Nimitz, who'd ordered Operation Vengeance, later said Yamamoto was the only Japanese leader who truly understood American power. He'd seen America, studied its industry, understood its people. His death was necessary, Nimitz said, but tragic. Yamamoto knew the truth and had to act against it. Ellis Zacharias, who played poker with him back in the 1920s, wrote that Yamamoto was a prophet without honor in his own country. He saw America's strength. He warned Japan not to challenge it. He knew modern wars are won in factories, not on battlefields. His tragedy was seeing too clearly in a culture that prized conformity over truth. Captain Layton, who helped crack the Japanese codes, put it simply, we killed the one Japanese leader who might have shortened the war. Yamamoto knew Japan had already lost before the fighting even started. Once he was gone, leadership fell to men who believed their own propaganda, and the war dragged on for 2 more bloody years. When secret documents finally came out in the 1970s, people saw just how good Yamamoto really was at sizing up the United States. The reports he sent back in the 1920s nailed it. He predicted American wartime production with scary accuracy. He guessed aircraft output to within 10% of the actual peak during the war. Oil production? He was off by just 5%, steel by 15%, shipbuilding by 20%, and this wasn't luck. Yamamoto did the math himself, counting up factory floor space, figuring out how much a worker could really crank out, tracking supply chains, penciling out what the US could do if it went all in for war. He worked with nothing but slide rules and notebooks, yet his numbers still beat the fancy computer models people use today. The most chilling thing? Yamamoto didn't just run numbers, he understood people. In a memo from 1940, he warned a surprise attack on Pearl Harbor would tactically succeed but strategically fail. Americans would unite in rage. Their industrial power, fully mobilized by anger, would be unstoppable. He saw it coming, plain as day. Yamamoto's story goes way beyond its time. It's really about what happens when you ignore the facts and bet everything on what you want to believe. He looked at the numbers, watched the factories, did the math. The tragedy, no one wanted to listen. Days before he died, he wrote to Chio Kawawai, "I have done my duty as I understood it. I warned them based on what I had witnessed. I told them about the factories, the oil, the endless production. They chose war anyway. I led their fleet knowing we would lose, hoping only to make the defeat less catastrophic. History will judge whether I was right to serve a cause I knew was doomed, but I could not abandon my country even when my country abandoned reason." He finished the letter with a haiku: "Spring rain in Texas. I saw iron become doom. Math defeats courage." Yamamoto died knowing every single prediction he made was coming true. The 6 months of victories he promised lasted exactly from December 7th, 1941 to June 4th, 1942. The industrial tidal wave he warned about hit with clockwork precision. The giant he feared would wake up, did, and with exactly the relentless resolve he expected. All those years spent in America, studying at Harvard, digging into petroleum engineering in Detroit, watching assembly lines in Texas, counting oil rigs in Washington, measuring what the U.S. could really do if it tried, gave him a kind of perfect foresight. He saw not just America's power, but its potential, and he understood that modern war was about output, not bravery. The factories he toured as a student became the arsenals that crushed his fleet. The oil fields he studied fueled the ships that hunted him down. The assembly lines he watched spat out the bombers that burned his cities. Every notebook he filled turned into prophecy. But Yamamoto's story isn't just about defeat. It's about the guts to speak up, even when nobody wants to hear the truth. He saw what others wouldn't, counted what others ignored, and warned what others refused to believe. His tragedy wasn't that he got it wrong, it's that he was exactly right. In the end, America taught Yamamoto the hardest lesson. In a war of industry, numbers decide everything. He did the math, saw the truth, and called the shot. Japan would have 6 months to run wild, then the real fight would start, and they'd lose. He was right, down to the day. Yamamoto spent years warning that Japan couldn't win, only to be forced into leading the charge. He died, shot down by the very American planes he'd warned about, his warnings ignored until it was too late. In the ashes of defeat, his prophecy stood. He saw America, and he knew.